I bought my dream property, a 150-year-old cabin mansion, completely legally. But the moment I arrived with my keys, a woman was screaming in my face. "That's my son's inheritance," she yelled. "You have no right to be here." I had no idea who she was, but she was about to make restoring this historic cabin the biggest fight of my life. She filed fake complaints. She organized protests in my driveway. She hired expensive lawyers to prove the property was somehow still hers. And she had connections everywhere, building inspectors, county officials, even the sheriff's department. I'm Marcus, a restoration architect. And this is the story of how one HOA Karen tried to steal my legally purchased property, and how I fought back that I never thought buying my dream property would turn into a nightmare. But here I am, standing in front of a 150-year-old cabin mansion that I purchased fair and square, listening to a woman screaming at me like I've committed some unforgivable crime. Let me back up. My name is Marcus, and I'm a restoration architect. I've spent the last 15 years of my life breathing new life into forgotten buildings, watching history come alive under my hands. There's something almost spiritual about taking a structure that's been abandoned, neglected, left to rot, and bringing it back to its former glory. Every beam tells a story. Every nail has a purpose. And this cabin mansion, this absolute masterpiece of 1870s craftsmanship, had been calling to me for months. I first saw it during one of my weekend drives through the countryside. You know those drives where you're not really going anywhere, just letting the road take you where it wants? That's when I found it, tucked away at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, hidden behind oak trees that must have been there since before the Civil War. The cabin was massive, not your typical log structure. This was a full mansion, built in the old frontier style with hand-hewn logs, stone foundations, and these incredible dormer windows that caught the afternoon light like they were winking at me. I pulled over immediately. The property had a weathered for sale sign half buried in weeds, and I could feel my heart racing. This was it. This was the project I've been waiting for my entire career. I called the realtor that same day. Turns out, the cabin had been in foreclosure for almost 2 years. The previous owner had passed away, and the estate couldn't keep up with the property taxes. It was being sold as is, which in the restoration world means it's either a gold mine or a money pit. I spent 3 weeks getting inspections, surveying the property, checking every foundation stone and roof timber. Yes, there was damage. Yes, it needed serious work. But the bones were solid, and that's all that matters when you're doing this kind of restoration. The price was steep, I won't lie. But I've been saving for years, and I had investors interested in the project. This wasn't just going to be my home. It was going to be a showcase, a living museum of American frontier architecture. I made an offer. It was accepted. We went through escrow, inspections, all the legal hoops. Everything was legitimate. Everything was documented. I closed on the property on a Tuesday morning in late September. The realtor handed me the keys with a smile and said, "Congratulations, you're now the owner of a piece of history." I felt like I'd won the lottery. That weekend, I drove out to the property with my truck loaded with tools, supplies, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. I was ready to start the restoration, to begin the careful, loving process of bringing this cabin back to life. I pulled up to the property around 8 in the morning. The sun was just starting to burn off the morning mist, and the cabin looked almost magical in that golden light. I was taking photos, documenting the before state, when I heard a car door slam behind me. I turned around to see a silver SUV parked halfway up my driveway. A woman was marching toward me, and I mean marching. She was maybe in her late 50s, wearing a pink tracksuit that looked expensive, with perfectly styled blonde hair and sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Before I could even say hello, she started yelling, "What do you think you're doing here?" I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, can I help you?" "You can help me by getting off this property right now," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This land doesn't belong to you." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "Actually, ma'am, I just purchased this property. I closed escrow last Tuesday." Her face went red. And I mean red, like someone had cranked up the saturation on a photo. "You what?" I bought this cabin and the surrounding 3 acres, I said calmly, pulling out my phone. I have all the documentation if you'd like to see it. She didn't even look at my phone. Instead, she stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that made every hair on my neck stand up. I don't care what kind of fake papers you have, she hissed. This property was supposed to go to my son. It's his inheritance, his birthright. I took a step back, tried to process what I was hearing. Ma'am, I don't know who you are or what your connection to this property is, but I purchased it through a legal foreclosure sale. The previous owner's estate was settled through the courts. That's a lie, she screamed, and I mean actually screamed. My husband's family owned this land for generations. This cabin belonged to his grandfather. It should have gone to Brandon, not to some random stranger who thinks he can just swoop in and steal what's rightfully ours. Now, I'm a patient person. I've dealt with difficult clients, stubborn contractors, city inspectors having bad days. But something about this woman's tone, the way she was looking at me like I was the villain in her personal drama, set off alarm bells. I understand this might be emotional for you, I said, keeping my voice level. But the legal system determined that this property was sold fairly. If your family had a claim, it should have been addressed during the foreclosure proceedings. She laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was cold, bitter, dripping with contempt. Oh, you think you're so smart, don't you? Coming here with your fancy legal talk. Well, let me tell you something, mister. I'm the president of the Oak Ridge Hills HOA, and this property falls under our jurisdiction. And I will make your life absolutely miserable if you don't walk away right now. Wah! Those 3 letters sent a chill down my spine. I dealt with homeowners associations before, and they range from mildly annoying to absolutely tyrannical. But I'd done my research. I checked the property records, the deed restrictions, everything. According to the county records, this property is not part of any HOA, I said, pulling up the documents on my phone. It predates the development of Oak Ridge Hills by over a century. It's grandfathered in. Her eyes narrowed behind those expensive sunglasses. We'll see about that, she said, her voice dropping to something that sounded almost like a threat. I have lawyers. I have connections. And I have a community of homeowners who will stand with me. You're not welcome here. This is my property, I said firmly. I have every legal right to be here. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of me, of my truck, on my license plate. I'm documenting this trespass, she announced, and I'm calling the police. Ma'am, you're the one trespassing right now, I pointed out. This is private property, and I'm asking you to leave. For a moment, I thought she might actually take a swing at me. Her whole body was vibrating with rage, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working in her cheeks. You have no idea who you're messing with, she said, her voice low and venomous. My son deserves this property. He's wanted to fix up this cabin since he was a little boy. This was going to be his project, his legacy. And you just come in here with your money and steal it from under him. I didn't steal anything, I said, fighting to keep my own frustration in check. I participated in a legal sale. If your son wanted this property, he had the same opportunity to bid on it that I did. He didn't know, she shrieked. We didn't know it was being sold until it was too late. The estate lawyer never contacted us, never gave us a chance to make things right. I felt a tiny bit of sympathy for her then. Losing a family property is painful, I understood that. But that didn't give her the right to harass me. I'm sorry for your loss, I said genuinely. But that's not my responsibility. I purchased this property legally, and I intend to restore it. If you have a legal claim, you're welcome to pursue it through the appropriate channels. But right now, I need you to leave my property. She stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then she smiled, and it was one of the most unsettling things I'd ever seen. You'll regret this, she said softly. I promise you, you will regret buying this property. I will make sure of it. She turned on her heel and marched back to her SUV, the morning sun glinting off her sunglasses. I stood there, tools in hand, watching her drive away, and I felt the first real twinge of doubt. What had I just gotten myself into? I shook it off. I'd dealt with difficult neighbors before. This would blow over. I started unloading my truck, eager to get to work, to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of restoration. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That woman, whoever she was, had meant every word of her threat. And something told me that fixing up this beautiful, historic cabin was going to be a lot more complicated than I'd ever imagined. I grabbed my tool belt and headed toward the front door, keys in hand. The cabin was waiting. And so, apparently, was a war I hadn't signed up for that I spent the rest of that morning trying to shake off the encounter with Karen. That's what I started calling her in my head, though I didn't actually know her name yet. Karen, the HOA president who thought she could intimidate me into giving up my dream property. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped inside the cabin for the first time as its owner. The smell hit me immediately. Old wood, dust, decades of accumulated memories mixed with the mustiness of abandonment. But underneath all that, I could smell something else. Cedar and pine. The original timbers still strong after a century and a half. The main room was massive, with a stone fireplace that took up almost an entire wall. Hand-carved beams crossed the ceiling, and even through the layers of grime and neglect, I could see the craftsmanship that had gone into every detail. This wasn't just a building. It was art. I pulled out my notebook and started documenting everything, taking measurements, making notes about what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but they were solid. The windows were original, wavy glass that distorted the view in that beautiful antique way. I was so absorbed in my work that I almost didn't hear the vehicles pulling up outside. Almost. The sound of multiple car doors slamming made me look up for my measurements. I walked to the window and felt my stomach drop. There were 4 cars parked in my driveway now. And Karen was back, this time with reinforcements. I counted 6 people total, all of them looking up at the cabin with expressions that ranged from curious to hostile. Karen was standing in front of them like a general addressing her troops. I took a deep breath and walked outside. "Can I help you folks?" I called out, trying to keep my tone neutral. Karen turned to me with that same unsettling smile from earlier. "Marcus, isn't it?" she said, and the fact that she knew my name sent a chill through me. "I thought it would be good for you to meet some of your neighbors. After all, we're all going to be living in such close proximity." One of the men stepped forward. He was tall, probably mid-40s, with the kind of aggressive posture that told me he was used to getting his way through intimidation. "I'm Richard Chun," he said, not offering his hand. "I live in a house just down the hill from here. And I have to say, I'm concerned about what you're planning to do with this property." "Concerned?" I repeated. "Why would you be concerned?" "Because this is a historic area." Another woman chimed in. She was younger, maybe early 30s, wearing yoga pants and a concerned expression. "We have certain standards in Oak Ridge Hills. We can't just have people doing whatever they want." I looked around at the group, trying to gauge the situation. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully. "But as I told Karen earlier, this property isn't part of your HOA. It's grandfathered in, and I'm a licensed restoration architect. I specialize in historic preservation. This cabin will be restored to period-appropriate standards." "That's not what we heard," Richard said, crossing his arms. "Karen told us you're planning to turn this into some kind of commercial venture. A bed and breakfast or event venue." I felt anger flare in my chest. "That's completely false," I said, looking directly at Karen. "I never said anything like that because it's not true. This is going to be my private residence." Karen shrugged, completely unapologetic. "Well, can you blame us for being concerned? A stranger buys property that should have stayed in the family, refuses to tell us his plans." "I just told you my plans," I interrupted. "And I don't owe any of you an explanation. This is my property." Actually, a new voice spoke up, and I turned to see a thin man with glasses stepping forward. "We have reason to believe this property does fall under HOA jurisdiction. The original boundaries of Oak Ridge Hills were drawn in 1987, and according to our research, this parcel was included." "Then your research is wrong," I said firmly. "I have the deed, the title report, and a survey. This property predates your HOA by over 100 years, and there's no covenant or restriction binding it to your organization." "We'll see what our lawyers say about that," Karen said sweetly. The yoga pants woman looked genuinely distressed. "We're just worried about property values," she said. If you start making major changes, bringing in construction crews, it could affect the whole neighborhood. I wanted to laugh. These people lived in modern McMansions built in the last 20 years, and they were worried about a historic restoration affecting their property values. Construction is temporary, I said, keeping my voice level. And when I'm done, this property will be a beautifully restored piece of local history. If anything, it should increase your property values. Or it could be an eyesore that sits half-finished for years, Richard said. We've seen it happen before. People buy these old places with big dreams and no realistic budget, and then we're stuck looking at a construction zone. That's not going to happen, I said. I have financing, I have a detailed project plan, and I have 15 years of experience in this field. Karen pulled out her phone and started taking more pictures. What are you doing? I asked. Documenting the current state of the property, she said innocently. For our records. In case there are any code violations or zoning issues that need to be addressed. There are no violations, I said, my patience wearing dangerously thin. And I'd appreciate it if you'd all leave my property now. This is bordering on harassment. Public road, Richard said, pointing at the driveway. We're not technically on your property. I looked down at where they were standing. He was right. They were just barely on the edge of the easement. Clever. Fine, I said. Stand there all day if you want. But I have work to do. I turned to walk back toward the cabin, and Karen called after me. By the way, Marcus, I took the liberty of filing a complaint with the county about unpermitted work being done on this property. I froze and turned back around. What unpermitted work? I haven't started anything yet. She smiled that poisonous smile again. Well, someone's been here. We have reports of noise, truck traffic, people coming and going at odd hours. The county takes these things very seriously. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides. I just closed on this property 4 days ago. The only thing I've done is walk through it and take measurements. There's been no construction, no work, nothing that requires a permit. Then you won't mind when the inspector comes out, she said. I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding. The group started to disperse then, getting back into their cars. But Richard lingered for a moment. Look, he said, his voice lower, almost reasonable. I get it. You bought your dream property. But you're not understanding the situation here. Karen's family really did have a connection to this land. Her husband's grandfather built this cabin. And her son, Brandon, he's been heartbroken about losing it. Then Brandon should have participated in the foreclosure sale, I said. I'm sorry for their loss, but that doesn't give them the right to harass me. Richard shook his head. You're not hearing me. Karen is not someone you want as an enemy. She has connections all over this county. Building inspectors, zoning officials, the sheriff's department. If she decides to make your life difficult, she will. And there won't be anything you can do about it. Is that a threat? I asked. It's friendly advice, he said. Maybe you should consider selling the property to Brandon. I'm sure he'd pay you a fair price, cover your costs, and everyone walks away happy. I'm not selling, I said firmly. This isn't about money. This is about preserving history and building a home. Richard sighed like I was a child who didn't understand basic math. Your funeral, he said, and walked back to his car. I stood there in the driveway, watching them all leave, feeling like I'd just survived the first skirmish in a war I hadn't known I was enlisting in. The rest of that day was tense. Every time I heard a car on the road, I looked up, half expecting another confrontation. But none came. I worked until the sun started to set, making lists, taking photos, planning the restoration phase by phase. I was locking up the cabin when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello. Is this Marcus Williams? A professional voice asked. Yes, this is Marcus. This is Jennifer Kowalski from the County Building and Planning Department. I'm calling about a complaint we received regarding unpermitted work at 1847 Old Mill Road. My cabin's address. There's no unpermitted work, I said, already exhausted. I just purchased the property. I haven't started any construction. I understand, Mr. Williams, but we're required to investigate all complaints. I'll need to schedule an inspection. Would Thursday morning work for you? Thursday was 3 days away. 3 days I could have been making progress on planning and prep work. Do I have a choice? I asked. Not really, she said, but her tone was sympathetic. Look, between you and me, We get complaints like this sometimes. Usually it's neighbor disputes. Just make sure you have all your paperwork ready, your deed, your title, proof of purchase. And if you haven't started any work, the inspection will be quick. I'll be there Thursday, I said. 9 a.m., she confirmed. And Mr. Williams? If you're planning any major renovations, make sure you pull the proper permits. A property that age is likely to have historic designation considerations. After she hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time, just staring at the cabin. This was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful. Instead, it felt like I'd walked into a nightmare. But I'm not someone who gives up easily. I've gutted buildings down to their studs and rebuilt them from nothing. I've navigated city bureaucracies, dealt with impossible timelines, worked through budgets that made my accountant cry. If Karen thought she could intimidate me into walking away from this property, she had no idea who she was dealing with. I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach but determination in my heart. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Her name was Patricia Chun, no relation to Richard, thankfully, and she specialized in property law. I worked with her on several projects over the years, and she was sharp as a tack. "Marcus," she said when she answered, "please tell me you're calling about a new project and not a problem." "It's a problem," I admitted. I laid out everything that had happened, from Karen's initial confrontation to the HOA neighbors to the county complaint. Patricia was quiet for a moment after I finished. "This Karen sounds like a piece of work," she finally said. "That's putting it mildly." "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to request a title search confirmation from the county, just to make absolutely certain there are no HOA restrictions or covenants on your property. Second, I'm going to send a cease and desist letter to this HOA, making it clear that any further harassment will be met with legal action." "Will that work?" I asked. Honestly, maybe, maybe not. People like this, they think they're above the law. They think if they make enough noise, they can bully people into submission. But we have the law on our side, and that counts for something. "She said she has connections," I said. "Building inspectors, county officials." Patricia made a disgusted sound. "Of course she does. Small-town politics are the worst. But here's the thing, Marcus. As long as you're doing everything by the book, following every rule to the letter, there's only so much she can do. Document everything. Every interaction, every phone call, every complaint. We might need it." I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly better. But only slightly. The inspection on Thursday went smoothly. The inspector, a tired-looking man named Bob, walked through the property, checked that I hadn't started any work, and closed his file. "You're clear," he said. "Complaint was unfounded. But you will need permits when you start the actual restoration work. This property's on the historic register, so you'll need to go through the Heritage Commission for approval on any exterior changes." "I know," I said. "I've worked with historic properties before." Bob nodded. "Word of advice? Get your permits in order before you do anything. Don't give them any ammunition." "Them?" I asked. He gave me a knowing look. "The HOA. Yeah, I know who filed the complaint. And I know Karen Peterson. She's filed complaints on half the properties in this county at one point or another. Woman has nothing better to do than make people's lives miserable. So that was her last name. Karen Peterson. Why does she get away with it?" I asked. Bob shrugged. "She's rich, she's connected, and she's relentless. Most people just give in because fighting her costs more than it's worth. But if you're determined to stand your ground, more power to you." After Bob left, I sat on the front steps of the cabin and looked out at the property. The oak trees were starting to turn, autumn colors beginning to show. It was beautiful here, peaceful, or it would have been if I didn't feel like I was being watched. And maybe I was being paranoid, but I could have sworn I saw a car sitting at the end of the road. Silver SUV, just sitting there. Watching, I decided to ignore the silver SUV. Maybe it was Karen, maybe it wasn't. Either way, I wasn't going to let paranoia control my life. I had work to do, permits to file, and a cabin that needed my attention. The next week was a blur of paperwork. I spent hours at the county office, filling out historic preservation applications, meeting with the Heritage Commission, getting architectural drawings approved. Every single form required 3 signatures and seemed designed to make the process as tedious as possible. But I pushed through, Because that's what you do when you love something. You fight for it. During one of my trips to the county office, I met a woman named Diane who worked in the records department. She was probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and the sort of efficiency that comes from decades of government work. "You're the one who bought the old Peterson cabin, aren't you?" she asked as she processed my permit application. I looked up surprised. "You know about it?" She smiled sadly. "Honey, everyone in this office knows about it. Karen's been in here twice already, demanding to see your purchase records, trying to find some loophole to contest the sale." My heart sank. "Is there a loophole?" "Not that I can see," Diane said, stamping one of my forms. "The sale was legitimate, went through all the proper channels. But that won't stop her from trying. She's got her lawyers working overtime, I'd imagine." "Why does she care so much?" I asked. "I mean, I understand it was family property, but it's been foreclosed for 2 years. Where was her concern then?" Diane leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, the Pedersens had plenty of opportunities to save that property. Karen's husband died 6 years ago, and his grandfather's estate was a mess. Taxes weren't paid, maintenance was ignored. The family could have stepped in at any time, but they didn't. So why the sudden interest now?" "Because her son Brandon is turning 30 next month," Diane said. "And apparently, there was some promise made that he'd inherit the cabin. But promises don't mean much when property taxes go unpaid. The county doesn't care about family drama. We care about what's legally owed." I absorbed this information, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and frustration. "I paid fair market value for that property," I said. "More than fair, actually." "I know you did, hon," Diane said, handing me back my stamp forms. "And you have every right to restore it. Just watch your back. Karen Peterson doesn't forgive, and she doesn't forget." I thanked her and left the county office with my approved permits in hand. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like I just armed myself for a battle I still didn't fully understand. That afternoon, I returned to the cabin with my construction crew. I'd hired a team of specialists who understood historic restoration, people who knew the difference between preserving history and destroying it in the name of modernization. Jake was my lead carpenter, a guy in his 50s who'd been working with old buildings longer than I'd been alive. Maria was my stone mason, an artist who could rebuild a chimney with period-appropriate mortar and make it look like it had always been there. And Tommy was my general laborer, young but eager, with a genuine respect for the craft. We started with the exterior, carefully removing damaged siding, inspecting the log structure underneath. Every piece of wood we removed was cataloged, photographed, assessed for potential reuse. This wasn't just construction. It was archaeology. We were working on a south wall when a truck pulled up. Not Karen's silver SUV, but a newer pickup truck, expensive and immaculately clean. A man got out, and I recognized him immediately from the photos Karen had shown the HOA group, though I'd never seen those photos. Somehow I just knew. This was Brandon. He was probably late 20s, with his mother's sharp features, but his father's build, tall and broad-shouldered. He walked up to the property line and just stood there, watching us work. Jake noticed him first. "Friend of yours?" he asked me quietly. "I don't think so," I said, setting down my tools. I walked over to where Brandon was standing. Up close, I could see he didn't have his mother's aggressive energy. He looked sad, actually. Lost. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm Brandon Peterson," he said, and his voice was softer than I expected. "I guess you've heard about me. Your mother mentioned you," I said carefully. He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I bet she did. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to see the place one more time before you start really changing things." I studied him for a moment. There was no threat in his posture, no anger in his eyes. Just grief. "You want to look around?" I heard myself asking. His head snapped up, surprise clear on his face. "Really? Why not?" I said. "It's just a building, and it was your family's. I can understand wanting to say goodbye." We walked up to the cabin together, and I could see him taking in every detail. The way the afternoon light hit the windows. The sound the porch made under our feet. The smell of old wood and history. "I used to play here when I was a kid," Brandon said quietly. "My great-grandfather built this place with his own hands. Every log, every stone. He brought my great-grandmother here after the Civil War, started their life together in this cabin. I felt a pang of guilt, which I immediately pushed away. I'd done nothing wrong. It's a beautiful piece of history, I said. I'm going to take care of it. Brandon nodded, running his hand along the doorframe. I know you probably think my mom is crazy, he said. And honestly, she kind of is. But she's not wrong about this place matching to our family. Then why didn't someone step in before it went to foreclosure? I asked, try to keep the edge out of my voice. Brandon sighed, and it was the sound of someone carrying too much weight. My dad died suddenly. Heart attack, no warning. And everything was a mess, his finances, his estate, all of it. This property was tied up in his grandfather's trust, and there were legal battles, family disputes. By the time anyone realized the taxes weren't being paid, it was too late. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, and I meant it. My mom blames herself, Brandon continued. She thinks if she'd paid more attention, if she'd fought harder with the lawyers, she could have saved it. So now she's redirecting all that guilt and anger at you. That's not fair, I said. I know, Brandon agreed. It's not fair at all, and I told her that. But she doesn't listen to me. She never has. We stood there in silence for a moment, two strangers connected by a piece of property that meant different things to each of us. For what it's worth, Brandon said finally, I'm glad it's you and not some developer who'd tear it down and build condos. I can see you actually care about this place. I do, I said. I really do. Brandon pulled out his phone and took a few pictures, just simple snapshots of the cabin and the surrounding trees. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. If I offer to buy it from you, what would you say? I looked at him, this man who'd grown up with memories of this place, who probably had childhood dreams tied to every room. I'd say no, I told him honestly. Not because I don't understand what it means to you, but because I have dreams for this place too, and I'm not ready to give them up. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. That's what I figured. Mom's going to lose her mind, but I had to try. Your mother's already lost her mind, I said, then immediately regretted the harsh words. Sorry, that was accurate. Brandon finished with a sad smile. Don't apologize. I know exactly who my mother is. I've spent my whole life watching her bulldoze people who get in her way. She can't bulldoze me, I said with more confidence than I felt. I hope you're right, Brandon said, because when she sets her mind to something, she doesn't stop, ever. He started walking back toward his truck, then paused and turned around. Hey, Marcus, when you finish restoring this place, I'd love to see it. If that's okay. Something about his sincerity got to me. Yeah, I said, I think that would be okay. After Brandon left, I felt unsettled in a way I couldn't quite explain. Jake came over, wrench in hand. That looked intense, he said. It was weird, I admitted. He seems like a decent guy. Unlike his mother. Very unlike his mother. We got back to work, but I couldn't shake the conversation. Brandon's words kept echoing in my head. When she sets her mind to something, she doesn't stop. That night, I went home to my apartment in the city, took a long shower, and tried to decompress. My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia, my lawyer. The subject line read, "You need to see this." My stomach dropped as I opened it. Patricia had forwarded me a document, some kind of petition filed with the county. I scrolled through the legal jargon, trying to make sense of it. And then I saw it. Karen Peterson, acting as president of the Oak Ridge Hills HOA, was filing a formal complaint claiming that my cabin property actually did fall under HOA jurisdiction due to a boundary amendment passed in 1992. She had survey maps, historical documents, even testimony from original HOA board members. It was elaborate, detailed, and if I was being honest, kind of impressive in its thoroughness, even if it was complete nonsense. Patricia's message below the document was short and to the point. This is going to be a fight. She's hired Blackwell & Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the state. They're not messing around. We need to meet ASAP. I sat there on my couch, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of what was happening settle over me like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a neighbor dispute anymore. This was war, and Karen had just fired the first real shot. I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built, at the career I'd spent years developing. I thought about the cabin, sitting there in the woods, waiting for someone to love it back to life. And I made a decision. I wasn't backing down. I didn't care how much money Karen had, or how many lawyers she hired, or how many county officials she knew. That cabin was mine, legally and morally, and I was going to restore it, even if it meant going to war with the most vindictive woman in the county. I called Patricia back, even though it was late. She answered on the second ring. "You saw it," she said. "I saw it. What do? We fight," Patricia said simply. "We file a counter motion, we get our own expert testimony, and we prove that her boundary amendment claim is fraudulent. Because that's what it is, Marcus. She's manufacturing evidence. Can she do that? She can try. And if she's got lawyers willing to back her up, they'll make it look legitimate enough to tie us up in court for months." Months? I felt sick. Maybe longer. This is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and exhausting. I need you to be prepared for that. I thought about everything I'd invested, not just money but heart and soul. "I'm prepared," I said. "Let's do this." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Somewhere across the county, Karen Peterson was probably sitting in her expensive house, planning her next move. Maybe she thought I'd fold under pressure. Maybe she thought I was just another person she could push around until I gave up. But she didn't know me. She didn't know that I'd spent my entire career fighting to preserve things that other people wanted to tear down. Buildings, history, beauty. I wasn't going to let her take this from me. The next morning, I was back at the cabin before sunrise. I stood in the front yard, watching the light break through the trees, and I made myself a promise. No matter what Karen threw at me, no matter how dirty this fight got, I was going to see this through. This cabin deserved to be saved, and I was the one who was going to save it. The legal battle dragged on for 3 months. 3 months of depositions, document reviews, expert testimonies, and court appearances. Patricia was relentless, systematically dismantling Karen's boundary amendment claim piece by piece. We discovered that the 1992 amendment Karen was citing had never actually been properly filed with the county. It existed only in HOA meeting minutes, with no legal weight whatsoever. The survey maps she'd presented had been altered, dates changed, boundaries redrawn. When Patricia's investigator uncovered the original documents from the county archives, Karen's entire case collapsed like a house of cards. But she didn't stop there. She filed noise complaints every single day. I had my crew working. She called the building inspector so many times that Bob finally told her if she filed one more frivolous complaint, he'd report her for harassment. She organized protests, had HOA members standing at the end of my driveway with signs claiming I was destroying neighborhood property values. It was exhausting, but I kept working. Every morning, I showed up at that cabin. I replaced rotted floorboards with reclaimed wood from the same era. I restored the stone fireplace, carefully repointing the mortar. I refinished the original windows, preserving every pane of wavy antique glass. The cabin was coming back to life, and despite everything Karen threw at me, I could see its beauty emerging. The turning point came on a cold November morning. I was working on the porch, replacing some damaged support posts, when Brandon's truck pulled up. He got out, but this time he wasn't alone. There was an older woman with him, probably in her 70s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had seen a lot of life. "Marcus," Brandon called out. "I brought someone who wanted to meet you." I set down my tools and walked over. The woman extended her hand, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "I'm Margaret Peterson," she said, "Brandon's grandmother, and I believe I owe you an apology." I blinked, surprised. "You don't owe me anything." "Oh, but I do," Margaret said firmly. "My daughter-in-law has been making your life hell, and it's because of promises I made a long time ago. Promises I had no right to make about property that wasn't legally secure." She looked up at the cabin, and I saw tears in her eyes. "My husband built this place," she said softly, "and when he died, I let it fall apart. I let the taxes go unpaid because I couldn't bear to deal with it. And then when Karen tried to claim it for Brandon, I stayed silent because I felt guilty." "Mrs. Peterson, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I've watched what you've been doing here. I've driven by several times, though I never had the courage to stop. And what I see is someone who loves this cabin the way my husband did. Someone who understands what it means." I didn't know what to say. Margaret reached into her purse, and pulled out an envelope. This is a letter I've written, stating clearly that the Peterson family relinquishes any claim to this property and supports your restoration work. I'm also going to testify, if needed, that Karen's legal actions are without merit and against my wishes as the family matriarch. Grandma, you don't have to, Brandon started. Yes, I do, Margaret said firmly. Karen needs to understand that not everything can be fixed by bulldozing people. Some things are just gone, and we have to make peace with that. She handed me the envelope. I'm going to tell Karen to drop the lawsuits, stop the harassment, and accept reality. And if she doesn't, I'll cut her off from the family trust. That should get her attention. I looked down at the envelope, then back at this remarkable woman. Thank you, I said, my voice rough with emotion. This means everything. No, Margaret said, smiling. Thank you for saving my husband's cabin. It deserves someone who'll fight for it. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me with news. Karen had dropped all legal action. The HOA complaints had stopped. The protests ended. It was over. Just like that. Apparently, Margaret had made good on her threat, and Karen valued her inheritance more than she valued being right. The restoration took another 6 months to complete. 6 months of careful, loving work. When it was finally finished, the cabin looked exactly how it must have looked in 1875. The logs gleamed with fresh treatment. The stone chimney stood proud and sturdy. The windows sparkled, catching the sunlight in that beautiful antique way. Inside, I preserved every original detail while carefully adding modern necessities in ways that didn't compromise the historic integrity. The wide plank floors, the hand-carved beams, the massive fireplace, all restored to their former glory. It was everything I dreamed it would be. On the day I officially moved in, I threw a small gathering. My crew came, of course. Patricia came, raising a glass of champagne to victory. And to my surprise, Brandon came, bringing Margaret with him. We stood on the porch, watching the sunset through the oak trees, and Margaret smiled. My husband would have loved what you've done here, she said quietly. I hope so, I replied. I know so, she insisted. You've given this place a future. That's all anyone can ask for. Karen never came. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved on to terrorizing some other poor soul about zoning violations. Some people never change. But standing there on my porch, in my beautifully restored cabin, surrounded by people who'd supported me through the fight, I realized something important. Karen hadn't won. But more importantly, this was never about winning or losing. It was about preservation, about taking something broken and making it whole again, about standing up for what you believe in, even when the whole world seems lined up against you. The cabin had survived 150 years of weather, neglect, and family drama. And now it would survive another 150, maybe more, because I'd fought for it. And I'd won, not against Karen, though that was satisfying in its own way. I'd won against time, against decay, against the idea that old things aren't worth saving. That night, after everyone left, I sat by the restored fireplace with a glass of whiskey and just listened to the cabin. The way the old wood settled and creaked. The way the wind moved through the eaves. The way history whispered in every corner. This was home now. My home. And no HOA Karen could ever take that away from me. Outside, the oak trees stood sentinel in the darkness, just as they had for generations. And inside, I finally allowed myself to rest. The battle was over. The restoration was complete. And the cabin, this beautiful piece of living history, would stand for generations to come. All because I'd refused to give up. All because I believed it was worth fighting for. And you know what? I was right. That cabin still stands today. Beautiful, restored, and mine. Karen never apologized. She never admitted she was wrong. But she learned that money and connections can't beat someone who refuses to give up. The cabin taught me something important. That history is worth fighting for. That standing your ground matters. And that sometimes the things worth having are the things you have to fight the hardest to keep. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA drama and real-life property battles. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever dealt with a nightmare HOA or a Karen who thought they owned something that wasn't theirs? I read every single comment. And remember, This story, like all stories on this channel, is inspired by real experiences. Thanks for watching, and never let anyone bully you out of what's legally yours.